Please don't mind me. I am just here to tell stories. Just press the like button and let's begin. I work as a highway driver and have a strange set of rules to follow. Yes, that's right, I work as a highway driver. Despite how outrageous it sounds, nobody realizes how important it is. Highway drivers aren't well known for a reason. The public can't know about the existence of it. My job is simple: to drive on highway roads from start to end. At least that's what you think, right? Not at all. I drive on highways to test the safety of the roads and look out for killer monsters so that you can drive on the road safely, aside from vehicle accidents. I became a highway driver when I saw how much the pay was, and I've been on the job for 5 years now. On my first day, I was assigned to some busy highway, I can't specify, and issued a set of rules made just for that highway. I was to reach there by 9 p.m. and stop at the checkpoint, which was handled by command. I didn't expect it to be such a nightmarish job. As I was driving on the highway itself, I was instantly hit by the realization that the roads were concerningly deserted. These roads would usually be filled with cars from day to night, but seeing it empty made me feel uneasy nevertheless. When I reached the checkpoint, I was told by the staff on duty that roadblocks were set up to prevent any civilians from interrupting the road tests, which only confused me further. As I had reached here 20 minutes early, I waited in the staff room and mindlessly scrolled in all 4 directions on my phone, as I didn't know what I was in for, yet I prepared myself for the worst. I was to drive a police car issued by the local police department and had to wear the uniform, which was such a difficult task for me to the point I had to ask for assistance from a colleague. Before I forget, here's the set of rules. Highway Security Agency. We drive in the danger so you may drive home. Guidelines for Highway Redacted Expressway Revision 2.4, June 9th, 2016. Redacted has a road length of 100 kilometers. The 1 to 10 kilometers distance is relatively safe, and you are permitted to stop at the shoulders for a short break. However, it is strongly advised to remain inside of your vehicle, regardless of your situation. From 10 to 15 kilometers, level 0 anomalous events will start to occur. At 11 kilometers, check that all your doors and windows are locked and all electrical systems are in order through the screen. At 13 to 14 kilometers, you may hear a voice or voices behind you, despite there being no one in the passenger seats. You are allowed to respond to these voices, as they are designated friendly. These entities will announce their leave by 14 kilometers and remind you to lock the doors. At 15 kilometers, you may hear tapping on the windows. Whatever you do, ignore them. Playing loud music will help to drown out the tapping. If you don't hear the tapping anymore, tune down the radio. 315 to 25 kilometers is potentially safe. You are allowed to leave your vehicle for a toilet break during this distance, but remember to have your gun on hand and leave your engine on. Should you hear screaming from behind you, immediately get in the car in 5 minutes. This is how long the entity will take to reach you. If you didn't leave the engine on and find that your engine won't start, initiate maintenance systems through the screen, around 1 minute before the end of 5 minutes. If the time is up, immediately take the unliving pill. It's a better outcome than what it would do to you. At 23 to 25 kilometers, check that all your doors, windows are locked, and electronics are in order. 4. The Temporary Auxiliary Checkpoint, TAC, will be at 50 kilometers, another 25 kilometers away from you. Only at 25 to 40 kilometers will you be experiencing higher level 1 anomalous events. From 25 to 30 kilometers, you will see a man wearing the same uniform as you standing beside a patrol car similar to yours near the shoulder of the road. This man is a highway manager who will check in on you. If what you see does not match with what was stated, immediately drive off and do not look back. Once he waves you over, stop for him and allow him to enter. He will ask you questions about your safety and well-being, in which you will answer honestly. This man will remain in your car until you reach the TAC. However, if any unrelated personal question is asked, immediately press the assistance button 4 times. If the man you see does not match with what was stated, example bloody uniform and unmarked vehicle, fully black clothed and no vehicle, etc., you are in imminent danger. Drive away as fast as you can. The entity will attempt to chase you on foot or by car, in which you will respond by deploying spikes or firing at it. The entity will only stop chasing you when you reach the corner at 30.5 kilometers, so slowing it down is the only option. If the man asks any unrelated question, not related to what was stated, you are in danger. Do not respond to these questions. Once you realize this, immediately press on the assistance button without attracting attention from the entity. The auxiliary patrol car will be there to pick up your body in the morning. From 40 to 48 kilometers, if the radio starts to play static noises, do not turn it off. Immediately stop the car and close your eyes. Do not open them at all. Even if you hear someone calling your name, ignore it. They are entities. Once you feel tapping on your left shoulder, the entities will never tap. It is safe to drive again. If you see people in the back seats, your eyes on the road and ignore their presence. If any of them start screaming, it means they know you noticed them. Immediately shoot at all three of the entities before they retaliate. Manager will assist. Once they are dead, leave their bodies on the road. At 49 to 50 kilometers, check all doors, windows are locked, and electronics are in order. Should the right back door be unlocked, notify the manager. He will dispose of the entity in the car at the TAC. 5. At the TAC, you will hand the vehicle over to the manager, who will incinerate it alongside the entity in the back seat. From there, you will be excused for a 35-minute break while your vehicle is prepared. 6. From 50 to 75 kilometers onwards, you will encounter Level 2 anomalous events. When driving from 50 to 55 kilometers, your vehicle may start to malfunction, doors unlocking and locking, radio playing static noises, etc. When this occurs, immediately kill the engine, open up the hood and using a knife, exterminate the entity you find in the hood. From 55 to 60 kilometers, the engine may die abruptly and the temperature in the car decreases to below 0 degrees Celsius. Immediately start the car as fast as possible. Do not look at the back seats, even if you hear something calling you. It will disappear by 61 kilometers. From 60 to 65 kilometers, the lampposts may start flickering. Stop the vehicle and hide in the trunk without exiting the car. Try your best to not make any sounds, as it will alert the omni-entity of your presence. If it roars, it has already noticed you. After 5 minutes, it is safe for you to drive on. From 65 to 75 kilometers, you may see entities that appear similar to your loved ones. Whatever you do, do not look at them. Do not speed up. It will know that you know. Even if you feel breathing behind your neck, focus on the road. 7. At this point, any entity in your vehicle would have left. Conduct a routine system check on your car through the screen, doors, electronics. From 75 kilometers to 100 kilometers, you may start to encounter Level 2 and 3 anomalous events. At 75 to 85 kilometers, the road ahead of you may appear to crumble. This is a psychic omni-entity. Do not stop your vehicle nor exit it, as the entity is trying to lure you out. Continue driving, regardless of what appears in front of you and what you hear on the radio. After 85 kilometers, it will leave you alone. From 85 to 90 kilometers, you may see a checkpoint. A major red flag to check is whether the lights are all switched off. Do not stop your vehicle and drive through it. If you are not sure, check the distance left on the screen. However, if you stop your vehicle and enter, we will not be able to recover you. At 90 to 94 kilometers, a horde of entities may appear in front of you. Drive straight through them and do not look back, as it will only cause them to chase after you. If this happens, the only way to get rid of them is to let the officers at the last checkpoint take them out. From 94 to 98 kilometers, it is relatively safe. However, do not stop your vehicle for more than 8 minutes, as it will alert the entities of your presence. At 98 to 100 kilometers, a man will manifest in front of the car. Do not recognize him. Do not even acknowledge his presence. Focus on the road. Once you have finished your shift, pass the vehicle over to the maintenance staff at the final checkpoint, and from there, you will be permitted to clock out. I was superstitious, but at least to a certain extent. It was difficult to believe that monsters existed in this world, but then again, it was the government we're talking about. I knew it wasn't in their best interest to prank their own citizens. That's when I realized I was in for a hell of a ride. I'm a Postmates delivery driver based in Northwest Las Vegas. I've seen some weird shit. I was browsing this sub and I came across the old posts by the guy from the US Forest Service Search and Rescue, talking about all the weird stuff he's seen and heard over the course of his career. I've been running Postmates here for a while now, and I can guarantee that rural areas do not have a monopoly on bizarre and creepy shit. I thought I would share some stories of what I've seen on the job. For clarity, I live in the Las Vegas, Nevada suburb of Centennial Hills on the outskirts of the city. I deliver around there, in Summerlin, and in North Las Vegas, and the inner city near downtown. I work the night shift often because there's less competition for offers. The first thing that you'll notice if you hang out in the outskirts of Vegas at unconventional hours is all the beat-up cars that are sitting around empty at every dead end directly facing the desert. If you don't believe me, go to one of these roads in a residential area near or after nightfall, and you'll always see at least one of them, just sitting there, with no reason. They're never there in the daytime, and they are always facing away from the desert toward the city. Some of them I've seen idling with the lights on and no one inside the vehicle. To this day, I have never met anyone who has been able to tell me what those cars are doing there or who they belong to. One time I was delivering McDonald's to an apartment complex and accidentally ended up on the wrong floor. A middle-aged white guy, one of those types that looks really tough without you really being able to tell why, answered the door. He took one look at me and said, "Is it done?" I thought he meant the food delivery, so I was like, "Yep, here you go." He gestured toward the burger bag. "So the proof's in there? Surprised the mess isn't leaking out." At this point I was weirded out enough that I glanced at my phone and realized I was at the wrong address, and I promptly turned around and bolted without saying anything. I suppose I'm lucky that there were some other people walking around the apartment lot at the time. If there weren't, I suspect I would have gotten shot before I made it to my car. I was out in the early morning, about 1:15 in the morning, coming back from a delivery in the lots near Lone Mountain, where there are large abandoned fields of dirt which separate the gigantic McMansions, when I saw a huge blaze of light in the middle of one of the fields. I pulled over to see what it was, and it turned out that there was a huge SUV on fire. No one else was around, just me and the burning car. I decided I'd call 911 and report it. I told the responder what was happening and the location of the lot. He sighed. "This isn't a number for prank calls, buddy. Tell your friends to knock this shit off. It's been long enough." Then he hung up. I was baffled as to what this reaction was about, but I decided to keep moving. Exactly 4 months later, I'm coming back from the same delivery, along the same route, and lo and behold, I once again see the burning SUV in the exact same position as before. Checked the time, and sure enough, it was 1:15. I mentioned later to my mom that this happened, and she was surprised. She said she'd seen a van burning in that lot late at night, 10 years ago. Suffice it to say, I avoid that route at that time of night now. One Sunday afternoon, I took a large delivery from a natural smoothie place to one of the giant houses at the edge of Summerlin. For those unfamiliar with Vegas districts, this is where the really rich, well-connected people live. I don't really remember what the place looked like, but I know it was practically a mansion. A young woman in her early 20s opened the door. She was strikingly attractive, and she was wearing a tight-fitting white dress. I was obviously turned on a bit, but there was also something a tiny bit unsettling about her. She smiled and asked me if I could put the delivery bag in the kitchen. I followed her into the house and noticed that everything was bright, clean, and immaculately polished. The kitchen was a little ways into the house, and it adjoined the living room. In the living room, there were 2 white couches, one of them empty, and the other containing 5 more women, all unbelievably beautiful and all wearing the same white dress. I set the bag on the kitchen counter and turned to the woman who'd greeted me at the door to get the all clear. I found her staring at me, smiling. She was just so entrancing that I returned the stare, gazing into her eyes. "Now you want to sit down on the couch," she said serenely. As she said it, I remembered that an intensely pleasurable feeling started coursing through my body. It was from her, I sensed. Her eyes, her words. I had to follow them. After that, I don't recall anything. My next memory is driving down Charleston Boulevard several hours later. I didn't feel any different, But that night I did notice that there was an odd bruise on the back of my neck, with a tiny skin blemish I didn't have before in the center of it. Months later, the bruise is gone, but I still have the blemish. Being horny makes me dumb. I'm ashamed to say that I've tried to revisit the house on several occasions since, but I legitimately can't remember anything about where it was located, and I've never been able to find it again. A few months back, around 10 p.m., I got a ping for a restaurant that was miles from where I was, which usually signifies an order that no one else wants to take. It looked like an easy pickup and drop-off, so I was a bit confused as to why no one wanted to take it. I take literally every order that comes my way, so of course I accepted. The pickup was at this quaint little diner on Decatur Boulevard, which looked like it had been there since the 80s at least. I was in and out of there quickly, and nothing really seemed problematic or off. The drop-off was close nearby, on a street filled with ancient, sprawling one-story homes. It was a decaying house with several dead trees in the front yard. It looked like no one had taken care of it for decades. Granted, that's par for the course in some of the older districts of Vegas, but the strangest thing was that the lots on either side of it had been completely razed. There'd been houses there once, that much was clear, but not any longer. There was nothing like that anywhere else on the street that I saw. Every other lot was filled. I had a feeling in the pit of my stomach that I shouldn't go up to the door, but the delivery had to be completed, or I'd get in trouble with corporate. I went up the walk and knocked. There was no answer. I knocked again harder. No answer. I figured I'd call the number attached to the order before I just left it there. It rang a few times, then picked up. There was silence for a few seconds and then a click, and the call ended. At this point, I was completely ready to nope out of there, so I put the food on the doorstep and turned to leave. I had made it halfway down the walk when I heard the door creaking open behind me. I turned to see who was there. There was no one. The door stood open, revealing a dark and dilapidated hallway, which looked even more decrepit than the rest of the house. It extended back further than the light would allow me to see, but I had the distinct feeling that someone, or something, was watching me from the end of the hallway. When I made it back to my car, I was literally shaking. All I wanted to do was go far away from whatever was in that hallway. I didn't take any more orders that night, and I didn't get any sleep either. In the morning, I decided to call the number again to see if anyone would answer. It had been disconnected. I'm a transport driver for serial killers. This drive made me quit. To clarify, I worked for the state, driving a white van that transported police officers along with dangerous apprehended criminals from the station to a high-security prison. These criminals included serial killers, sex offenders, and other such abominations. The van had 8 seats in total, 2 at the front separated from 6 at the back by a thick, transparent plastic panel for driver protection. I was never specifically told the crimes they had committed, but the drive could be over an hour long, which meant I often had enough to gauge from their conversations and ramblings. Some would yell and try to fight the police or escape during the ride, but the van was built rock solid to account for those types. Some were child abusers, molesters, remorseless killers who gloated about their sins. Others would beg the police to let them go. I was disgusted by these people, but never disturbed to the point of wanting to quit. After 10 years on the job, nothing phases me anymore. In fact, I was proud of what I did. The more horrific the person, the more I liked the idea of sending them off to get what they deserved. That was until one day, when a calm, well-groomed young man was apprehended and brought to the van. 4 police officers accompanied him. He was dressed in a tailored blue suit and had shiny brown slicked-back hair. Couldn't have been older than 30. At first, I mistook him for a manager or lawyer from a distance, before noticing he had both hands behind his back. He nodded politely as he passed my window and was taken to the back. They unfolded the seats and sat down, and the door was slammed shut. I started the engine. "This ride's an hour and a bit. You're not going to give us any trouble, are you, son?" asked one of the officers. "Course not. You guys don't get paid nearly enough for that," said the man in the suit. A few of the policemen scoffed. "You're right on that one," another officer said, rolling his eyes. "My uncle used to be a cop. Ironic, I know," the man in the suit replied nonchalantly, still handcuffed. "But when he started, there were 50 in his division. Now there's about 10. Makes you wonder if all the tax money is going to nuclear warheads instead. Wouldn't be surprised, one officer mumbled to another, shaking his head. My lawyer told me not to say that because it might piss you off, but I told him you'd all let me go as soon as you heard it. The policeman guffawed, the entire van erupting with laughter. I wondered what was so funny. Whatever crime he had committed, this man was bantering without a care, while being deported to face life in prison, or possibly the death penalty. He cracked a few more jokes and they were wrapped around his little finger. A while later, he caught my eye in the rear view mirror. You must hear all sorts of crazy stories, said the suited man, talking directly to me. Imagine being an Uber driver but all the passengers kill people. I'd watch that reality show, he continued. Still, it must be satisfying in a weird sort of way, bringing them all to justice, literally. Yeah, sick people like you, I replied. He stared at me through the mirror. I felt a chill out of nowhere. My blood ran cold, and I instantly regretted opening my mouth. Sick people like me? There was silence for a few seconds. The cops looked at each other awkwardly. I kept quiet. Well, cheers to you on behalf of all the sick people like me then, he finally said. I couldn't tell if he was being sarcastic. I mean it. If it weren't for you, we'd all have to walk to prison. Wouldn't want to drop the soap after that hike. He must be fun at parties, a cop smirked. I realized the cop was referring to me. They all laughed again. For the rest of the journey, they talked about politics, stories about other prisoners, and how early they could leave for work. They had an odd chemistry with him. The policemen acted very differently to how they usually did. They usually tried to bully the criminals or scare them into a confession. On the contrary, this time it almost seemed like they were all at a big dinner party, and I wasn't invited. Perhaps they were getting some entertainment while they could, or they were intimidated by him and didn't want to admit it, I thought. Some serial killers were notorious for being charming after all. Everyone's heard of Ted Bundy. I realized that even after all that chat, I still had no idea what crime he had committed. When we arrived, I opened the back doors for them to get out. Thanks for the lift. Drive safe. He grinned at me and they took him away to the prison. The nerve, I thought. I got back in the driver's seat. About a week later, I was in between shifts and decided to take a break at a cafe in the parking lot. I walked inside and joined the queue, eyeing a big latte. As I glanced to the side, my heart skipped a beat. A man was wearing a blue suit which looked exactly like the one that the criminal with the slicked back hair was wearing. I blinked. This man had an afro and was reading a newspaper. Same suit, perhaps, but obviously not the same guy. I exhaled with relief. I ordered my latte and sat down at a table, sipping it slowly. The man in the blue suit sat by the window, still reading the paper. I glanced at him for a while and noticed that he was just staring into it, without turning the pages. As I stood up to leave, he folded the newspaper and looked up towards me. His lips stretched into a wide, menacing smile, and he dragged his finger across his neck as he stared at me with wide eyes and tilted his head. We stared at each other for a while in silence, my heart starting to race. Then I looked around frantically, suddenly concerned for my safety. Everyone in the cafe was absorbed in their own world. It seemed like no one else had seen the gesture he had made towards me in a very public space. I rushed out of the cafe, glancing behind me every few steps, suddenly paranoid. He turned my head to lock eye contact with me, gleeful that his threat was having its intended effect on me. For the next few days, I kept hearing noises, footsteps, scratching, sometimes even the sound of someone breathing behind me. When I turned around, there would always be nothing there. Just as I thought I was turning schizophrenic, my suspicion that something was out to get me was confirmed again. I was at the grocery store on the weekend, putting vegetables in my cart as a woman wearing a blue denim jacket and flowery dress was walking towards me. She was pushing a cart with a baby strapped to the seat. "You better watch your back," she whispered as she walked past. That caught me off guard. I whipped my head around and she kept walking without looking behind her. She wasn't talking on the phone, and she wasn't with anyone else apart from the baby. That warning was undoubtedly for me. Had I just pissed off a cult of people dressed in blue? I got in the van the next day at 7 a.m. and headed off to the station. There was heavy traffic, and I was convinced I'd be late for work. I turned into a long stretch of road that was next to a steep drop, a metal railing fencing off the edge on the right. As I drove along the congested road, stopping and starting to move a few feet incrementally, I stared at the bumper stickers on the back of the white van in front. "It's gonna be a good day." There was a sun with a smiley face next to it. The traffic finally started flowing, and I approached an intersection where cars merged from the left-hand side. A set of traffic lights came just before it. I looked at my watch. "Please don't turn red. Please don't turn red," I thought. As if the universe was conspiring against me, the lights turned yellow, and as the van in front of me sped past them, they turned red. Fantastic. I slammed the brakes and looked up. I only saw the van in front for a split second, and suddenly, out of nowhere, a massive lorry T-boned it violently from the left. A loud crash combined with a painful crunch stunned me into paralysis. Both vehicles crashed through the railings and went hurtling over the edge of the cliff. The lights turned orange, then green, but I remained unmoving in silence, shaking. There was an empty space in front of me where the van had just been. I could see people through their car windows, horrified and calling the police. Eventually, I snapped out of it and drove numbly to a side road, without having fully processed the event. I parked there and called my colleagues at the station to inform them about what had just happened. A few days later, I found out that both drivers had died on impact. The lorry had crashed into the van driver's side at 90 miles per hour, crushing him instantly. They thought it was a freak accident at first, until they recovered the remains and discovered the lorry driver's phone, which had been in a holder stuck to his windshield. It wasn't a GPS on the phone that was guiding him. At the time of the crash, he had been using a navigator app connected to a tracking device. The device had been tracking my vehicle. The police searched my van top to bottom and found the bug stuck to the underside of one of the back seats, the seat that the man in the slick-backed hair wearing the blue suit had sat in on his ride to prison about 2 weeks ago. I pieced it together as soon as they told me. The motherfucker must have slipped that out from a pocket or something and stuck it to the inside of my van as soon as I pissed him off. Turned out, he was an infamous underground weapons dealer. A lot of people who had their firearms confiscated, most of them for good reason, knew he was the guy that would supply them, so were absolutely infuriated when he got caught. Apparently, he had a cult-like following among those people, and wearing all blue was their low-key way of supporting him. I don't want to get too political here, so I'll just say that this guy was very well connected and had a lot of people on his side, even if it was under the radar, and I was their next target. I figured the blue suit guy must have somehow communicated to one of his cronies about the tracking device on my white van and told them to get after me. By pure chance, another white van was in front of me at the very moment they decided to strike. They must have mistaken the driver for me, knowing the vehicle was a white van in that approximate location. If those traffic lights hadn't turned red at the exact moment they did, that would have been me. I was supposed to die a horrific death that day. I quit the job that very afternoon, I found out, packed my bags, and moved to a new town. Since then, I've moved several times. The paranoia won't leave me. I think it'll stay with me for the rest of my life. Anytime I see someone wearing blue, a wave of terror sweeps over me. The same terror I felt seeing that van in front of me get pummeled and tumble over the cliff edge, knowing that should have been me. Previously, I'd always taken pride in the fact that I was a brutally honest guy, but I'm a lot more careful nowadays. And one thing's for sure, when someone makes a lame joke now, I always laugh. I used to be an Uber driver. My most recent passenger asked me to drive him to hell. When I turned 16, I claimed my first car, a 2004 Hyundai Accent from my parents. They had bought it from some shady dealer downtown for $800. The vehicle was beat, having close to 230,000 miles. The paint was a faded yellow, with a replacement maroon rear door. Third gear was choppy, but a new transmission would cost more than the entire car. My family wasn't the richest on the block. Despite that, I was content with the vehicle. I would be able to go anywhere at my heart's desire. At age 19, the Accent still ran, barely, and decided I could make a quick buck by working for Uber. Over the past few months, I've gotten used to driving people around downtown. I was the type of driver to not talk the entire way and respect whatever the person in the back was doing. All that mattered to me was that I was making decent money. With 2 jobs, pretty soon I could buy myself another car and ditch the old clunker. It was a Friday night. I had gotten used to driving around, waiting for calls. It was prime time for drunk people needing to get home. Eventually, I got a call to pick someone up at an unmarked location. What was strange, however, was that when I was about a quarter mile from the location, I had recognized it to be the old Market train station, which had been abandoned since before I was born. I pulled up near the boarded-up entrance to the station and saw a tall Hispanic man waiting. He looked very professional, wearing an expensive-looking suit and held a slim black briefcase. I wondered why he was at the old station. The location didn't suit him since it was the rundown part of town. He opened the door, and we greeted each other. He spoke in a strict, but rather kind and assuring voice. I took off and escorted him where he would like to go. "Take me to hell, please," he spoke, which completely caught me off guard. I didn't really know how to respond, so I just peeped out a quick, "Huh." His face remained straight. "All seriousness, man, where do you want to go?" I asked. "You'll know sooner or later." I assumed he was drunk, but his voice and tone were completely perfect. "I'll just take you to McDonald's, buddy." He didn't reply. "I'll take that as a yes," I said awkwardly. We were almost at the restaurant. All I had to do was take a left. What the fuck? I instinctively turned the opposite direction. It was like someone was controlling my mind. I tried making a U-turn, but I just couldn't. The man in the back just kept quiet. What the fuck is happening? Is this some kind of joke? No answer. I knew deep inside that this was something supernatural. I tried to resist the feeling, but I couldn't get out of it. It was like I was in sleep paralysis. I made hundreds of turns, eventually not knowing where I was going. I didn't know where I was. By that time, the streets were completely empty. I took a right turn on an unmarked street. It was surrounded by trees. I couldn't see more than 100 yards in front of me. The road was completely straight, with a constant downward slope. I floored the vehicle, shifting through gears faster than I could imagine. I wanted to stop, but I couldn't. I looked at the speedometer. The accent couldn't make it past 80 on the highway before, but the needle was topped out at 140. Soon, the needle made a full 360-degree rotation. I was going at least 200, and the engine was roaring louder than I could have ever imagined. I was so fixated at the speed of the vehicle that I didn't notice that the sky had turned red and was going downhill even further. It started getting immensely hot. My body had heated up to the point where I thought my face was on fire. I was going to hell. I looked back at the man in the back seat. His face remained still, looking at me with lifeless eyes. Suddenly, I slammed on the brakes. I was used to the shitty brakes of the accent, thinking that we would slowly come to a stop, but I was jolted forward. The road was flat now, and we had come to a complete stop. "Thank you," said the man as he left the vehicle. I wasn't able to get a complete look at my surroundings, but I remember seeing the bodies, piles upon piles of people still alive, screaming in agony. I yelled out to the man, and he turned around. "Are you Satan?" He looked at me and for the first time smiled. Then I lost consciousness. I woke up, terrified that I died and went to hell. I checked my surroundings. I was at the old train station. I soon realized that I could move freely. I quickly opened the door and got out. The sky was normal. It was a cold summer night. No more screams. Has it been a dream? I looked back at my accent, horrified to notice what was in the back seat. It was the man's briefcase. Attached to it was a post-it note reading, "For a new car." I opened it, and inside the briefcase was $500,000. I'm an Uber driver. Last week I picked up someone inhuman. I'm in college in a pretty rural part of the country. I won't get more specific than that. The important part is about halfway through this past semester, I was running pretty low on cash. I searched for a job on campus for a while, but I just couldn't bring myself to work retail or be at a desk answering phones all day. I only decided to drive for Uber because I could make my own hours and basically work as little or as much as I wanted. Plus, most of the time my passengers were students, so it allowed me to meet people on campus I might not have met otherwise. For a while, it was actually a really good gig. There were some late-night puke rides and even a couple drunkenly handsy guys in my front seat. But overall, I felt like I was making good money and not really working too hard. Until last week. I didn't have any plans for last weekend, so I decided I would go out and be a good Samaritan, driving drunk college kids home safely. I knew I'd make good money because there would be a surplus of people who needed a reliable ride, so I didn't really have anything to lose. I would wait in the McDonald's parking lot and read my book or play on my phone while waiting for someone's ride request to come up on screen. I'd pick them up, bring them home, drive back to the parking lot, repeat. I started driving around 11 p.m. and planned on finishing up around 3. Since most rides were just going between buildings on campus, I knew I'd be able to get a lot of drives within that 4-hour period. Everything went pretty smoothly, a couple of close calls with vomit and my leather interior, but no true disasters. I was getting tipped pretty well despite the inebriation of the passengers I was picking up, and everyone, for the most part, was really friendly. At about 1, I got a notification that someone had requested a ride. The pickup spot was really close, one of the old apartment buildings about 10 blocks away from the lot I'd been idling in. Looking closer, I noticed where the ride was heading. It was some random address a few towns over, much farther than I'd gone with any of my other drives that night. At the moment, this actually made it more appealing to accept, since obviously the longer the ride, the more I get paid. It didn't seem like a sketchy area or anything like that, so I accepted the request and turned over the engine. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I realized I'd been sitting there reading my book for almost a half hour. I guess it had been a slow point of my night, and I turned around to see if there were a lot of other cars around. Weirdly, everything was off. The street lights, the window lights of any nearby businesses, even the McDonald's inside lights were off, although I swore the one I was parked at was 24-hour. I brushed it off, figuring everything was just finally closing up for the night, and that I wasn't usually out late enough to see the streetlights be turned off. It only took me 4 or 5 minutes to get to the address where I was supposed to pick this guy up. He didn't have a profile picture, but his name was Mark. It also seemed like he didn't have any rider ratings, meaning his account was either brand new or he just never used it. I made a right turn onto the street where the address was located, and as I looked around, I started to think maybe someone pranked me. The street was completely residential, which wasn't out of the ordinary for the area, but all the houses were completely dilapidated. Graffiti, broken windows, boarded up front doors. I couldn't imagine anyone possibly living there, let alone having a party there. My house hunting was interrupted by the sound of my phone telling me I was approaching the destination on my right. I looked down the street, and I could just barely make out the shape of who I assumed was the person I was picking up, standing on the front lawn. As my car inched closer, I could see that he was really just standing there. It didn't look like he had a phone in his hand or anything. Even stranger, he was waving. Not waving at me, my car wasn't even close enough for him to be doing that. He was out on the lawn, facing across the street, just waving at nothing. I really thought once I approached the final destination, I would see some newer, fancier house built on the street that I'd just never seen before. I was very wrong. The house that I approached, which was behind the lawn my passenger was standing on, looked almost more broken down than the rest. The roof had completely caved in, and you could see the old rooms through broken parts of the wall. None of the windows had any glass, and the front door had been completely ripped off of its hinges. Wind ripped through the frame, shaking the entire house. It was definitely not somewhere livable. I stopped the car right in front of the lawn, which is when I finally got a chance to focus on the man's frame for a brief moment. He was tall, lanky even, and had clothes on that didn't seem like they fit or matched. His pants cut off around his mid-calf and hugged his legs extremely tight, while his t-shirt moved with the wind around him, hardly touching his body. He had no coat on despite it being winter, but wore a fedora. His shoes were absolutely huge, looking almost disproportionate to his body. His face looked relatively normal, like a thin man in his early 30s. His cheekbones were very pronounced, and his eyes sunk hollowly backward into his skull. He was still waving, but now his eyes shifted focus to me. "Hi, here for Mark?" I rolled down my window about halfway. "Yes." The man started, ceasing his waving. His hand hung motionless in the air for a moment before returning to his side. He didn't break eye contact with me until he took a step to open the car door. Normally, when people are taking an Uber alone, they just sit up in the front seat. But Mark moved to the back door and sat on the rear right seat, diagonal to me. For some reason, this sent a shiver up my spine, knowing that he could basically just watch me drive without me noticing. After directing my phone to start the navigation, I decided to start a conversation. "So what brings you out tonight?" I looked at him in the rearview mirror. Our eyes met. I met some friends," he muttered. His voice was sharp and gravelly, and by his tone I could tell he didn't want to talk. Usually when I drive for Uber, I don't turn on my radio, since I know many people have strong feelings about music. I let him have his space and drove in silence for a few minutes, almost forgetting he was there until his voice piped up from the back seat. "Hey, do you mind if I eat?" I thought about it for a moment. Normally I would say no, but for some reason I just felt like I really didn't want to make this guy mad. He was bigger than me after all, definitely big enough to overpower me. As a relatively small woman, I knew I needed to be cautious about who I was angering. "No, that's fine." I saw him nod in the rear view before pulling up a bag from his feet that I hadn't noticed him having before, and I focused my eyes back on the road as he unwrapped his food. Another minute or so of silence passed, again leaving my mind nearly vacant of his presence. It honestly hadn't even sounded like he was eating anything, until the sound of his initial bite brought me out of my mental autopilot. Crunch! The sound was wet and loud. I didn't even need to look in the mirror to know that something strange was happening, but I was too freaked out to not sneak a glance. I wish I hadn't. When I looked into the rear view, I just saw teeth. Not long, sharp teeth, but normal human ones. Rows of them. His entire jaw had unhinged and expanded to the point where I could see all the way down his throat when he opened his mouth, and I would guess probably 8 or more rows of teeth spread back into his head. Blood dripped from the sides of his mouth down his chin, and he hardly even swallowed his previous mouthful before biting into the next piece. I quickly shifted my gaze back to the road before he could make eye contact with me. I'd forgotten to breathe until that moment, and it took everything in me not to swerve to the side of the road and take off running. I had no idea what to do, so I just kept following the directions. My phone said I only had another 3 or 4 minutes to go until I reached his destination, but now I wasn't sure if I even wanted to go there. Crunch. I just kept driving. Every time he took a bite, I could hear the sound of blood splattering against a nearby surface. I knew that no matter where I was taking him, I just wanted him out of the car as fast as possible. 2 minutes to go. Crunch. All the streetlights were still out, and I hadn't seen a single car since I left the pickup spot. I was praying for someone to just drive by, see me panicked, see what was happening in my car, and stop. As I looked out onto further nearby streets, everything looked desolate. There was no one to see this. 0.5 miles to the destination. Crunch. My heart was throbbing harder than I'd ever heard it before. I wouldn't let myself look back again. Out of fear he would see me. I knew what was happening back there wasn't something I was supposed to see, and I had to just pretend I couldn't. I made 2 more turns until finally I made a right onto the street where the destination was. To my horror, it was the exact same street I had picked him up on. Same empty houses, same graffiti, same uneasiness. I didn't know how it could be possible. I'd followed the directions perfectly. It was the only thing that allowed me to redirect my focus from my passenger. Sure enough, my navigation ended in front of the same dilapidated house I'd been summoned to. As I screeched my brakes to a stop, I could hear him gnawing on the last bit of something tough. "Here you are," I said. Sensing that he was finally still, I let myself glance back in the rear view again. Our eyes immediately met. His lips curled to a smile, exposing his inhuman teeth. He was covered in blood. It dripped down his neck and onto his baggy shirt, making almost the entire thing wet and stained. His pupils had rolled back, exposing only the whites of his eyes, but somehow I knew he was looking at me. His head seemed huge. "Thank you so much. Have a great night." Without breaking the stare, he reached over and pulled open the door handle, shuffling his thin body until he could throw his feet out onto the pavement. Holding the frame of the door, He lifted himself up and out. When the door finally shut, I couldn't help but to watch him move back toward his original spot, where he was standing when I picked him up. He had such a rickety nature about his movement, almost like he'd never truly learned how to walk. As if by instinct, he stopped in the exact spot that I'd first seen him and faced out toward the street. As I accelerated down the road, his bloody gaze followed me through the window. Even after I was far enough to only see him in the rearview mirror, I could tell his stare hadn't broken. He was waving. The next morning, I got up to discover that my car had no evidence of him ever being there. No blood, no food, nothing. My Uber app hadn't even acknowledged that I'd made the drive, which was maybe the worst part. I had no proof that any of this happened. I seriously considered that maybe this was all a dream after all, a product of my long night of driving. But it was just too real. I've had bad drives before, although nothing like this, and normally I would just allow myself to forget about it and move on. But it occurred to me, if he really had ordered a drive with me through Uber, it means he has my phone number.